This week, as we continue our study of film narrative, we are going to be looking at film directors a little bit more closely. Of course, we've talked quite a bit about film directors and what they do over the course of the semester, especially at the very beginning of the semester. But we're going to take an opportunity this week to examine a little more closely what film directors do and in the context of what all of the personnel on a film crew do, as well as in the context of film director being the chief creative person on a film, and films being artistic expression of their directors. This term auteur is one that we studied a little bit at the very beginning of the semester. And this is the idea that film directors are the authors of the movies that they make. Auteur is a French word meaning author. You can sort of tell that it's a very uh, similar word in terms of the length and even some of the letters in terms of the spelling and so forth. So auteur is the French word for author, and it is a term that was sort of coined in terms of using in respect to film directors in the immediate post World War II era of the 1950s by French critics. And it is the idea that directors are the chief creative people on the movies that they make, that directors have complete artistic control over a film. And of course, we know that from our previous study that the director is the person who makes all of the creative decisions on a movie, where to place the camera, what type of shot each individual shot is going to be in a film, how the shots are going to be edited together, the production design of the movie, the sound design of the movie, every creative decision related to the making of a film is ultimately the responsibility of the director. And that's the case with any movie. All movies, the director is the one making the ultimate decisions on all of these um, creative areas of the making of a movie. Not all directors are considered to be auteurs, though. There are a lot of directors that whose films are not considered to be artistic expressions or personal artistic expressions. There are only some directors that sort of are given the status of being considered an auteur in terms of being an author of a artistic expression in the form of a film. What becomes elements of artistic expression by the film director are the different elements of style and narrative that we have been studying over the course of the semester. The first part of the semester, the different elements of film style that we studied and have been continuing to examine in films, and then in the more recent weeks, the elements of narrative in films. These two areas together are what the director uses to express himself or herself artistically when they make a movie. And as you hopefully have become aware of over the course of the semester, there's a wide variety of ways in which film style and film narrative and the elements of style and narrative can be used by filmmakers. And the fact that there's so many varying different ways in which these elements can be used and the different combinations in which they can be used, there is resultingly a wide uh, variance in directing styles by different directors. And it's this issue of directing styles or the director's style that I'm going to talk about in the rest of this audio lecture. Uh, this is style in a slightly different sense than we've been talking about it so far. When we had our unit on film style earlier in the semester, we we're talking about the ways in which particular techniques or particular methods of the medium of film can be used. Here, when we're talking about style and talking about directing style, we're talking about style in the sense that you might use it in describing a particular person that their style. They have an interesting style, either of clothing or of uh, conducting themselves or so forth. And so it's this sort of style that we're talking about when we're talking about directing style, the way in which the person does things. So in this case of film directors, the way in which the director makes the creative choices that they make in the course of directing a movie. And so directing styles can be described by using different adjectives or descriptive terms. We can say a director has a dark directing style, or we might say that a director has a very complicated directing style, or all sorts of different adjectives or descriptive terms that we can use. And so, as I say, how we can analyze an individual director's directing style, we can examine and compare how they use the different elements of film style and how they use the different elements of film narrative to tell the stories of the movies that they're making. And so there's a number of different ways that we can do that, and a number of different things that we can look at when we are trying to examine the directing style of a particular director. One of these is in the choice of subject matter. Different directors choose to make movies about different things, different subjects. A director like Steven Spielberg, for instance, um, chooses to make movies about different sorts of things than a director like, say, Quentin Tarantino. Directors begin to distinguish their directing styles by the choice of subject matter that they have when they decide they're going to make movies on different topics. And then, getting more specific in terms of the elements of style as we have studied them over the course of this semester, uh, the director makes different sorts of decisions in terms of the camera work. Some directors are known for having elaborate camera movements in their films, or more extensive use of one type of shot than another, such as close ups or long shots or so forth. So, the different ways in which the director uses the camera can be part of their directing style as well. Editing as well can be part of the director's style. The choices that the director makes when they're editing the movie, different patterns of editing, the tempo of the editing, and what that means is that some directors have very short individual shots, so there's more edits or more cuts in a movie, whereas other directors will have individual shots that are longer in duration, and so there are fewer edits and have a slower tempo then in comparison with the other sort of director I described, which has a much faster tempo of editing in their films. Elements of mise en scène, mostly in the area of the settings and the set designs. Some directors choose to make films and thus have settings that are in the past, period pieces, historical sorts of settings. Other directors choose to make films and thus have settings that are more contemporary in nature, or take place just at the current time of whenever the film is made. And then set designs, specific locations in which the action of the movie takes place, can be designed in different ways that contribute to the way in which a director's films look, and thus contribute to their directing style. Use of sound and music, to get the fourth element of style in here. Different sound elements, some directors are known for their use of music in different ways, whether that's a particular kind of background score, or whether that is a use of, popular music songs in one way or another. And sound effects. Sound effects. Some directors have particular ways in which they use sound effects that make their directing style distinctive. And then a very important one as well is the casting and performances of the movies. There are directors who like to work with particular actors because they have developed relationships with them on a personal level, but also because they like what those actors represent and the types of performances that those directors are able to give the directors in the context of the individual films. A classical Hollywood example of this is John Wayne in many of the Western films that he made with director John Ford. A more recent and contemporary current example of that is the director Tim Burton, who has made many films with Johnny Depp as the lead character. And so, whether or not a director is working with somebody that they've worked with before, who they cast in different roles can be part of their style. Particular directors might be might have a tendency to like to use particular types of actors. Alfred Hitchcock, who directed Psycho, that we watched this semester, had a tendency and a proclivity and was kind of well known for wanting to cast and having in his films blonde females. We saw that in Psycho with Janet Leigh playing Marion Crane as just one example of that. And then finally, uh, another element of directing style can be the narrative structure. Some directors tend to make movies that are straightforward in nature, a linear chronology, to use one of the plot types that we learned about a couple of weeks ago. Um, and other directors tend to have more convoluted narrative structures in their films, where there's a lot of flashbacks, or maybe the narrative chronology is just sort of scrambled up in general, and so forth. Um, or just structuring their narratives in one way or another in terms of individual scenes and the way that they are assembled. So all of these things, beginning with the choice of subject matter, and then in different ways in terms of each of the elements of film style that we've studied over the semester, and then in terms of uh, who they put into their film in terms of casts and the way in which they structure the narrative. All of these are different ways in which an individual director can sort of put a distinctive stamp on their films and have a signature directing style that can be traced across multiple films that are directed by that same director.